Sometimes you look at a game and it's like, whoa, what happened in that game? I don't understand what happened in that game. It's too confusing. Nothing was really that confusing about this game. And I think that's what, where Carlsen shines, is that he's such a great fundamental player. What we're going to be doing today is reviewing the first week of the Pro Chess League, and we're going to be reviewing 5 key games from our match against the Canada Chess Bras, and kind of the ups and downs that we faced as a team in the first week, where the vast majority of people really had us written off.
I think Magnus in that way is like, I'm playing for Magnus' team, you automatically get an extra 100 elo, right? Because he's on the team. It just feels like that.
As just basically an automatic loss because the Canada Chess Bras were headlining Magnus Carlsen. But it turns out that we put up a very good fight and really in the last round of play really had it in the bag and let it slip away from us. So it was a little bit of a role reversal. We had the edge in the match in the end, but we had a few slip-ups, which we'll get to. But overall, we're as pleased as we can be with a loss in the first round, the first week, I should say, of the PCL. Obviously, we don't, want to lose matches, but it was a point difference, and we really probably should have won the match given our positions in the final round. So no one's to blame. It just shows that it's very competitive and that really anything can happen. In round 1 of the PCL week 1, the pairings are inverted. So basically, our first board plays their fourth board and vice versa. So in the first round, it is many-time U.S. Women's Champion Irina Krush, who is our fourth board, versus the world champion Magnus Carlsen, who was the Canada Chess Bras first board. We knew that this particular matchup was going to be a difficult one, needless to say, for anyone. We knew that playing the world champion, any of our players playing the world champion, would be a struggle. But obviously at the start, we know that the pairings are going to be a little bit more difficult for our fourth board. So we're going to jump in here to Irina's game against the world champion. I'm sure it was a pleasure for her to play. And we're going to kind of see what happens, or what happened in this particular game. So Irina played her trusted Queen's Pawn opening. So we have the Queen's Gambit style setup by White. And Carlsen in this game chose to play what is called the King's Indian, which is this particular setup for Black. So here you can see that the world champion is not taking much control of the center, but he's choosing to remain flexible and to try to attack the center once he can see how his opponent, Irina Krush, is going to set up her pieces. Well, Irina chooses the most classical way to play against the King's Indian, which is developed a knight to f3, Carlsen castled, and bishop to e2. This is by far the most classical way you can play against the King's Indian, and is very, very, very common. Now here is where the first deviation occurs from the well-trodden main line, which begins with the move pawn to e5. So that is the main move. Pawn e5 is the main move. Here, Carlsen plays the move c6, and that's a sideline. Doesn't make it like a terrible move or anything like that. It's just not the main move. So one thing you can see here on the left-hand side are the timestamps of the game. So up to this point, the players have taken no time because this is really early stages of the game, and it's very normal. But Irina castled. She figures, okay, nothing can be that wrong with castling, and she's right. Now Carlsen plays the move pawn to e5. And here there are several moves that top players play in this unique position, although it has been played before. The main moves are to advance the pawn forward, gaining as much space as possible, and bishop to e3, the move that Irina chose. Not closing the center so quickly, focusing mostly on developing pieces and active piece play. Irina played the move bishop to e3, but after seeing this game, I really think the testing move in this particular situation is d5 here. So even though she played bishop e3, and we're going to see how that went in the game, I think that if you were going to repeat this position, I think d5 might actually be the way to go, because the forcing sequence of moves that happened in the game was not necessarily favorable for white. It wasn't worse for white, but any white advantage really quickly diffused after bishop to e3. So bishop to e3 happened, and pawn captured on d4. Here, bishop takes pawn and knight takes pawn are possible. Irina played knight takes pawn. And now a series of forcing moves happens, which kind of liquidates the center of the board. And black really has no issues after what happened in the game. So Carlsen plays rook to e8, pressuring the pawn on e4. Irina plays what is the main move in the position and a very logical one, pawn to f3. And one of the things you should note about that is that even though it guards the pawn, there is pressure now down the e-file because the bishop on e3 is unprotected. So here, Carlsen played the move d5, taking advantage of that. Irina captured with the c-pawn, and here Carlsen captured with the knight, once again taking advantage of the fact that this pawn is semi-pinned because the bishop on e3 is unprotected now. Turns out this has all been played before. This is somewhat theoretical, but the line itself is pretty rare. Knight captures d5, c captures d5, and here is the first move where, I'm sure Irina was out of book at this point. If you look at the timestamps to the left of the board, you can see that she's already 3.5 minutes down on the clock in the rapid game. So she was already probably feeling a little uncomfortable. Carlsen has taken relatively no time here, so which tells me that he probably knows this or feels comfortable here, maybe has played it before. So the main move here is queen to b3, and that is so if black captures on e4, white can now play the move rook a to d1, opening up an attack on the d-file. And needless to say, there's also going to be some pressure on the f-pawn once white captures back on e4. So queen b3 in this position is the main move. Irina played the move king h1. And after the move king h1, that gives Carlsen just enough time to develop his queen side. You can see that his queen side is not very well developed. And he otherwise has a very, very, very solid position because his pawn structure is intact around his king. Irina has played the move pawn to f3, so if this pawn structure gets chopped up, she's going to be left with some weaknesses. It's kind of what happened in the game. Irina captured, which is fine, and then she played the very logical bishop to d4, trying to trade off this bishop on g7, which was exerting a lot of pressure on this diagonal. So all of this seems normal, but as it turns out, it's just not favorable for white. So Carlsen makes the capture, and more forcing moves start to happen here. He captures on e4, unleashing a discovered attack on the queen. We have a queen trade, and now we get this position. So here, material is even, but the position isn't even due to one major element, which is that black's pieces are more developed than white's. You can see that after the move bishop to e6, it's very difficult for white to make meaningful moves without losing material. So here's what I mean. You want to play rook d1 because you don't want black to have the control of the only open file. But if you play rook to d1, after I capture you, if you take with the rook, you lose the pawn on a2. Okay, and losing a pawn is not a good thing unless you have a really good follow-up. And if you take with the bishop, I'll still play rook to d8, and my rook is going to come to the second rank and cause a lot of pressure on the white position. White still will have a battle to fight here. Like, you can't really run away with your rook because you have back rank problems, so that's going to cause white to spend some time solving the back rank problem. In addition, black's pieces are very active. The bishop on e6 is pressuring the a pawn. The rook is on the d file. So these are small things, but they all add up. One of the things that I would say about endgame positions is that when you have fewer pieces, it's even more important that the remaining pieces that you have remain active. Because in the middle game, you can have a piece sitting idly on the side of the board, and it's like, okay, well, that piece isn't in play, but I'm playing with the other 5 pieces that I've got. In an endgame, you need your remaining pieces at their maximum. And here, white is not looking very good at all. So Irina played b3, which again is the most natural and logical move, at least in my opinion, because she's trying to block out the bishop and challenge the d file. Well, Carlsen does not give her the time to play rook d1, so he plays rook d2, gains a tempo on the bishop, and infiltrates into white's camp. So needless to say, white is feeling the pressure here. Bishop to f3, saving the bishops and protecting the pawn on e4. Now here, Carlsen plays yet again a very accurate move. Carlsen has one weakness in the position, one serious weakness that can be targeted, which is the c-pawn. So he quickly looks to remove that pawn from the c6 square and run it down the board in an effort to trade it off. So he plays the move c5, which I really like. I like that for 2 reasons. It prepares to trade it off, and it was possible that white wanted to play the move e5, which not only targets the pawn, but kind of pins it to the rook on a8. So by removing the pawn from the c6 square, you ensure that it can move so that you don't place yourself in a pin, and you're one step closer to trading off your only weakness in the position. White, in addition to not having active pieces, also has this weak pawn on e4, which obstructs the bishop but also can't really be defended by pawns. So if you just willy-nilly push it forward, it will be a target on the dark squares where the bishop won't be able to help it out. So it's just not that easy for white to get rid of their weakness here. So Carlsen's looking to trade off his weak pawn, plays the move c5. Irina plays rook f to c1, and Carlsen plays rook c8. So he, again, wants to push this pawn forward and trade it off. Rook c3, pawn to a5. I like that move a lot. Irina probably at some point wants to double up on this pawn. I like that a5 clamps down on any b4 possibilities and also even introduces the idea of playing the move a4 at some point. h4, this is an effort by Irina to cover the back rank and potentially get closer to trading pawns off in an effort to try to draw the game, because she would have understood at this point that she has the inferior position, and so at this point she would just be looking to try to draw the game. So h4 is a natural move. By computer standards, it may not have been the best move, but I understand why the move was played. And here Carlsen plays a very good move, which is king to g7. And king to g7 takes into account that if I ever advance this pawn forward and you try to pin me up, which has kind of happened in the game, I might be able to capture the b pawn, and if you capture my rook, it's not going to be with a check. So these preparatory moves like king to g7 are definitely the sign of a high-level player, because they improve their pieces before they rush to do anything. And the king on g7 is not only more active for the impending endgame, but it's also gets out of the back rank and possible checks toward the king. The king is very secure on g7, and it doesn't offer any counter chances to white. Irina played e5 to open up her bishop. It makes sense, but as you can see, that pawn has now left its ability to be protected, so it could be a pawn that is weak later in the board, later in the game. Rook to d4. He takes the opportunity to attack this pawn with tempo and reinforce the idea of c4, trading off his only weakness. He's still very active here. Pawn g3, guarding the pawn c4, and here is where Carlsen's move king to g7 really proves to be a genius move. So Irina doubles up on the pawn, and Irina pins Carlsen's pawn to the rook. But because of that genius move, king to g7, the preparatory move preventing a check on the back rank, Carlsen is now able to capture on b3. And if rook takes c8, there's this nasty move b2. And really, this is a trade of pawns. It's a fancy trade of pawns. The problem is that this little guy here on a2 is going to fall in the end. So, let's say rook to b1, I capture this, you capture here, I bring my bishop back to e6. Well, I'd like to play the move rook a4 and target this pawn on a2, and there's nothing you can really do about that. Okay, so not only are you going to go down a pawn, but it's going to be a very miserable endgame too. So Irina took back, and here Carlsen really had a nastier way to win than what he did. Maybe all roads lead to Athens in this particular situation, but like the move he played, rook to b8, but he actually had a more brutal approach here, which I analyzed a little bit in my notes, which is rook captures, and rook to b4. So this is a pretty straightforward approach, and it really is based on the ability. So first of all, this pawn is under attack. It's really based on the fact that if bishop to d1, guarding this pawn, Carlsen can play the move a4, winning the pawn outright. Since if you capture, we can pin the bishop on the back rank. If you defend the bishop, we play bishop to g4, and we attack the pin piece and win the bishop. And that, of course, would be a completely winning game. So that was a possibility. He chose to play rook to b8, which also targets the weakness. Irina played rook a1, which is a very smart move, and rook to b5. So keeping everything together is Carlsen, and he's got 2 points of attack now, the pawn on e5 and the pawn on b3. So multiple points of attack. There's just weaknesses everywhere for Irina. And her king is in question too, because the second rank is weak. And we're going to see that actually end the game in the time trouble here. You can see that Carlsen has 7 minutes and Irina has about 1 minute here, in what is a very, very difficult position. Rook a3, guarding the pawn. I don't even know what to suggest here. I understand that Irina wanted to try to keep some of her material. So she plays rook a3. Carlsen grabs the pawn on e5. King g1. He plays the rook to d2. And already we have a ladder checkmate being threatened on the board. So not only has Carlsen finally won one of those weak pawns, but yet again his pieces are very active and creating threats along the way. So the game ended after rook to a1, stopping checkmate. Carlsen now played rook to b2, threatening this pawn on b3. That would be a second pawn. So Irina, just with 11 seconds on the clock, played rook a3, and then that allowed mate in 1 with the ladder checkmate here in the end. In all fairness, at this point, even if checkmate is not allowed, the pawn on b3 is going to hang, and this pawn is going to come strolling down, and white's king is in question. White would be down material, and yeah, so it would just be a rough situation anyway. This was really just a nice game by Carlsen. It shows his class as a chess player. While Irina is a great player in her own right, a grandmaster, a many-time U.S. champion, U.S. women's champion, Carlsen might be the best player ever in history, and we could see that just from a small advantage in the opening of some pawn weaknesses and more active pieces, he was able to, to beat a GM in a very understandable game. Sometimes you look at a game and it's like, whoa, what happened in that game? I don't understand what happened in that game. It's too confusing. Nothing was really that confusing about this game. And I think that's what, where Carlsen shines, is that he's such a great fundamental player. The good news there was our first board, who was Grandmaster A. Wonder Liang, beat Jennifer Yu in their battle. And then our second board, Grandmaster Daniel Naroditsky, by the skin of his teeth, and I really mean by the skin of his teeth, like I mean like this much.
Oh, it's a draw now. He went all the way up. Danya, the trickster.
Okay, escaped the jaws of death in his game versus Razvan Priotu in the first round. I mean, that was like crazy. I was already crying whenever I saw his position. I was crying for him. And then when he escaped from that game and got a draw in the scramble, we were obviously relieved. And then in the game, Tari versus Brandon Jacobson, who is our third board, that game was a draw. So after the first round, we were 2-2. We go into round 2, and it is a tied match. So let's see what happens. So I am going to pull up the game, A Wonder versus Priotu. So this one was a heartbreaker for us because A Wonder had built up a fantastic winning position in this game. Really just played a great game as a whole. And just in the scramble at the end, let it go. So a heartbreaking game, but let's have a look at it, okay? And A Wonder had a few heartbreaking games, as we're going to see in our match versus the Canada Chess Bras. But let's go in order here. So this is round 2. We're going in even. A Wonder starts off with the move Knight F3, a very modest move. Again, flexible, wants to see what Razvan is going to do. Pawn C5, E3, modest approach, but okay, it's a game. Without a doubt, it's a game. Knight F6, Pawn B3, and G6. So we have a ready style opening by A Wonder, and it's a form of symmetrical English opening because you can see that the pawn is on C4 and C5. All right, castle, bishop to E2, knight C6, castles, and D5. Okay, so nothing serious is happening here. This position is, I don't want to say basic, but it's, it's just a modest position. There's no huge attack here or anything crazy going on. The players are just developing their pieces. So knight to C3, queen out to F5, rook to C1. Okay, white has a more kind of hedgehog-like pawn structure, a very reserved pawn structure. Black has a little bit of space, and it's kind of a balance between space and having a tidy pawn structure like white has here. So rook D8, there's nothing more natural than that move, putting the rook on the half-open file against the white queen. Here, bishop to B5 was played by A Wonder, which definitely puts the challenge to black because he may want to take this knight on C6, damage black's pawn structure, and play against the pawn structure. So Razvan plays bishop to D7, which doesn't allow that. And so I don't think anyone would criticize that move. Knight to E2, and now knight to B4. So Razvan has his eyes on the D3 square for his knight. And at this point, A Wonder's like, okay, wait a minute. I cannot allow this knight to sink into D3. And there's an attack on my bishop here on B5. It would be a disaster, positionally speaking, here for A Wonder to take on D7. And after something like rook takes D7, allow this knight to get into the D3 square. That would not be something you would really want. So here he plays the in-between move, knight to G3, attacking the queen. And now it is actually white, due to very specific reasons, tempos. It is white who actually has a little bit of an initiative. Let's see what happens. So the queen has to move somewhere. But no matter where the queen moves, the queen cannot keep her eyes on the D3 square. So that's going to give white a chance to flush the black knight out before that can happen. And so in the game, queen to d5 was played, and now a wonder is able to play the move bishop to c4, gaining another tempo on the queen. Black's queen retreats, and then kicks the knight out with the move pawn to a3. Now, you might say, why can't the knight go into the d3 square? Well, it's actually a very specific reason. A wonder here can take on f6. If the bishop takes on f6, he will have the move knight e4, and the queen will no longer be able to guard the knight on d3. So that would lose a piece. Queen is under attack, and the knight cannot be guarded. If you try to play something like knight to b2, counterattacking the queen, I take your queen, you take mine, and then now I capture on f7, where I'm attacking your rook, and I have discovered attack possibilities open up on you. So that's not viable. And similar things will happen if you take with the pawn, play knight to e4, followed by bishop to d3, and that's just not really an acceptable position for black. Okay, so now Razvan has to go backward, and here a wonder plays what I think is a great move, bishop takes f6. And I like that move because it essentially forces pawn capture, which, is obviously not desirable for black. However, Razvan here plays a pretty serious error and captures with his bishop. That now allows knight to e4, forking the queen and bishop, which doesn't seem like a big deal, but the queen has to run away, and he captures the pawn on c5. So here a wonder has won a pawn. Now, it's not all roses. He's given away his dark squared bishop on the queen side in exchange for a pawn, but that's a little bit different than when you give away your fianchetto bishop around your king. White's king is still pretty safe. Black might have some compensation because he has the bishop pair, but that's, you have to do a lot of work to prove that black has the compensation here. So Razvan plays bishop to e2, bishop to e8, queen to e2, and then d4 securing the central squares with his pawns. And here, White's extra pawn is telling because that extra pawn that White has is in the center, and so White advances the pawns into the center and blocks out, stuffs out Black's pieces. So here a wonder is looking very good. Razvan plays the move e5 to try to chip away at the center. Knight a4 in between move, queen a5, and now d5. So a wonder has a big position here. His pawns are rolling through the center. Black's pieces are not the most active. Knight e7, knight to c3, queen takes a3. So black has gotten the pawn back, but White's got the position now. So White has, after rook on f to d1, White has this nasty pass pawn on the d file and very, very, very active pieces. In addition, Black's pieces here are quite passive, so a wonder definitely has the edge here. Let's see what happens. Knight to f5, okay. Knight e4, attacking the bishop retreats, knight f to d2. So a wonder is trying to regroup his pieces and find, and maybe even try to kick this knight off of the f5 square. So that's exactly what happens. Knight e7. Probably a wonder's idea is if you go back to d6, I'll take on d6 and then probably put this knight on e4. So let's say we take with the queen, knight e4, we move away, and then, I think I would, even g5 looks, pretty nasty here. Although the computer says b5 might be a problem with that, and or just the move d6, opening up the bishop and giving the bishop a square to go to. So this looks like a pretty nice position for White. So Razvan went back to e7. A wonder brought the knight back to f3, and here it is Black who is starting to get the initiative. So Black now plays b5, kicking the bishop off of the square. Here, the best move really was to play knight to c3, which is not obvious, but the idea is that it stops the move pawn to b5, which is what happened in the game. So knight f3, b5, and now d6. So the game is blowing up. We had a capture on c4, a capture on e7, a trade on d1, and a capture on b3. So here, it looks like A Wonder is completely down and out. When I was watching the game, I was like, okay, this is not looking good. Both sides have a deep pass pawn, but to me, this one was more mobile and really much more of a danger. In addition, this pawn can come up the board, connect itself with the B pawn, and that's 2 pass pawns going down the board. So I was really afraid, but he found a very, very, very strong move here with the move rook to d8. And here, this is where it gets crazy. Rook d8 in itself looks like a crazy move because I can capture this knight and protect my rook on a8, which would seem as though that would win the game, basically. So I take this knight, and then if you take my rook, I take back with the queen, and I'm up a piece. But there is a nasty move here in the move queen to b5. Attacking the pinned bishop on e8. This was A Wonder's point. Attacking the bishop on e8. If you take my rook, I happily promote to a queen. You're still pinned, so you can't take my queen. And on the next move, my queens are dominating you, right? So that's not acceptable. And after queen to b5, there's simply no way to stop queen takes e8. So in the game, that's exactly what happened. Okay? And instead of queen takes knight, what Razvan should have played is the move b2. And there is an interesting line which leads to equality here, which is queen takes b2, queen takes b2. This is kind of crazy. Rook takes a8, so now there's this threat against the bishop on e8. If you try to come back and guard it like this, there's knight to d6, and it's actually white who's winning. White is going to win this bishop and then promote the pawn. So the only line here for black, which is kind of crazy, and okay, evidently it's still losing for black, is here, and the crazy move, knight to e1, is what the computer suggests. I mean, this is getting kind of crazy right now. If king to g2, queen c6 stops knight to d6, attacks the rook, attacks the knight, so that would be fine for black. After queen c1 check, the crazy computer line is knight to e1. If you take my knight, I step up, and you have no way to guard this bishop. If you try to create an escape hatch, I take the bishop, and then I move my rook pretty much anywhere, and I promote my pawn in the next move. Kind of a sick position, to be honest with you. Razvan did take the knight, and now after queen to b5, A Wonder was winning the game. And so black is searching for the perpetual here. Queen takes g4, king f1, h5, queen takes e8, and it looks completely over, right? After queen takes e8, A Wonder's pieces are flying into the game. It's a sure win, right? Like, it's over, wrap it up, this board is over, chalk it up, A Wonder wins this game. Not so fast. Queen to g8 check, king h6, queen. Now, here, white has 2 queens, obviously, and black's only hope is in the form of some kind of perpetual check toward the king. And if black's king somehow escapes from what is a mating net, then maybe this pawn could become something that white needs to worry about. So Preotu takes on f3, and that is really the final straw. Here, he could have played the move queen to c4 check, which keeps him in the game. And after this, that's a repetition. So you would have to step over to the e file, check, check, and, you have to start retreating your pieces, and it's just not that simple, especially after the move b2. White has 2 queens, but this is far from clear, as it is black who's also threatening to get another queen. black can capture one of the queens on demand. This is really complicated. So in the game, Razvan played queen takes f3. Now this is where a wonder really should have finished the game. In fact, on social media today, we posted this position as a puzzle. And poor A Wonder saw it on Instagram and gave us a sad face. You know, it's heartbreaking for him to miss such an opportunity as well, as he's such a strong player. But here's the thing, guys. I want you to see one thing. Again, if you look to the left of the chessboard, you can see the timestamps of the position. You can see that they're down to 7 and 9 seconds, respectively. The move is indeed, as Felifant says, queen captures g7. And it's on the basis that if you take on g7, I have a mate in 1 with queen h8 check. And yeah, that's just nasty. After queen takes g7, the game would have been just completely over. So queen takes g7, king to g5, take on e5, and getting all of your queens into the attack and all of your other pieces. And here, I mean, I guess I would play queen to g3 because I know that that's an easy win. The computer has a very, very, very nice mate here with rook h4 check, then using this queen to go to f6. If the queen on f3 captures, there's queen to g3 checkmate. And so you have to play g5 or king back to h3. And then you're losing by checkmate. So, okay, needless to say, one of those wins would have been found after queen takes g7. But not so soon. Here, A Wonder played the move queen h8, throwing away all of the advantage.
White had 2 queens.
Whoa, hey, bro,
White...
hey, nah, hey, man, I'm knocking everything over in front of me.
A Wonder only had 7.8 seconds. He had forced mate. If he takes this bishop,
and queen
and
h8,
the king takes, queen h8 is checkmate.
And now we're back to an even game because of what happened. Bishop takes queen, queen takes, king g5. And I think he just did it kind of instinctively, thinking, okay, I'm driving the king out into the open. This has got to be winning. But in fact, all of black's pieces are protected. Okay? If you try to take my rook here, that's a perpetual check. You don't have a way to escape repeating the position 3 times. So on the move, you can't take my rook because I'm threatening perpetual check. So A Wonder takes the pawn, but now everything is protected. The rook is protected once and only attacked once, and the king is escaping. So the king went to g4. Now here, I mean, that's a mistake. The king had to go back to h6, and then a draw is in the cards. But here, Razvan plays king to g4, allowing yet another checkmating net. Another checkmating net. So after rook to d4, king h3, this did not happen. Okay. So what happened in the game was king g4, and here A Wonder should have played the move rook to d4. He played queen to d4. And the checkmate is, after this, here's the thing. They're playing with seconds on the clock, right? They think they're playing with seconds on the clock. So here, it's easy to think that black might actually be winning here. White has a quiet move, which wins the game, and that's the move queen to g5. This has been very difficult to play with only 8 seconds on the clock. Because, of course, there's a checkmate in 1 here. And you do have a check here, but after this check, the king steps up, and there's no way to stop mate. If you don't stop mate, then, that's not good, and you don't really have another way to do it. if you try to play queen to g4 and sack your queen, after this, it's still mate. So that was a Wonder's real chance. Again, after Razvan stepped forward. But that was difficult to see. Now, after queen to d4 check, it is actually black that's winning because the black king has escaped from the checks, and now white has to reckon with this pawn coming down the b file. So this is what happened. And now we're in a queen endgame where somehow the black king is safe enough to where white does not have a way to bail out with a perpetual. So in their time trouble, this is how the game ended. So it's even material, but black's king is extremely active. And after a few moves of repetition, Razvan took the pawn on h2, seeing that white is simply too far out of play to have a perpetual check or anything of that nature. And yeah, so we'll play out the moves here. But yeah, king g2 is a really strong move. There aren't many checks on the king. There is a check here that is going to be met by a block. And so after this, basically the winning plan is to go here, 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 and here. And surprisingly, white can't really move. You can't move the queen away from the f-pawn because then you lose the f-pawn. You can't move your king away. And therefore, so you can't move your queen and you can't move your king. So therefore, you're basically in Zugzwang. I mean, your queen has to stay here to guard f2, and there's nothing stopping this pawn. So this was a topsy-turvy game. A Wonder's winning. He's got 1,000 queens. He just needs to find the win. It escaped him. He had a win again. That one was much harder. It escaped him, and then he actually found himself losing. So this would have had to have been a heartbreaker for him. Obviously, as we're watching, we have the benefit of hindsight and computer analysis and commentators analysis. But in the heat of the moment, anything can happen. And the players had 8 seconds on the clock. You would expect a Wonder to have seen that. But again, it's not just can you see a tactic quick enough. It's the pressure of playing on a big stage. It's the pressure of playing for a team where you think your team really relies on you. You don't want to screw it up. So part of what makes chess a sport is that when you're in competition, you face these things like anxiety and other things that you don't face when you're studying at home. So like I texted a Wonder afterward because he had a few unlucky mishaps. We still love a Wonder. He's still a great part of our team. Tough game for a Wonder, but a team game, a team match is a team match for a reason. So, we have other teammates to make up for. So in this particular round, we saw a Wonder losing a game here against Razvan that he probably should have won, although at some point maybe he was losing. I mean, it was hard to tell. It was really just an up and down game. And then definitely, if we go back to that key moment here, after Razvan took on f3, he has a very direct shot here with queen takes g7. And had he have convinced himself to play that, or had he have seen that in the heat of the moment, he would have done it because you can't capture it. You can't capture the queen. So we know that's going to be a winning advantage, guaranteed. So it just escaped him in the time scramble. So yeah, tough game. Naroditsky played a good game against Jennifer Yu, and he won. And that happened pretty quickly. So the match was even, 1-1. Magnus beat Jacobson in a nice game. And then it was Tari and Irina. Tari beat Irina. So we had a rough round. It was looking, at least from the sidelines where Grant and I were observing, it looked to us like we would have another even round. Then when this mishap in a wonders game happen. We actually ended up losing this particular round 3-1, where it really looked like we were going to have a healthy 2-2 going in even again. So it was 2-2 in round 1, 3-1 after round 2, because we lost 3-1. So now it's 5-3. We're down two team points, right? So we need to come back in round 3 really strong in order to have a fighting chance, and we did. So let's jump into an important game, and this one finished pretty quickly. So we were able to pay even closer attention to the other games that were going on in this particular round. So this was the game Brandon Jacobson versus Jennifer Yu. Jennifer Yu is a U.S. women's champion, and Grandmaster Brandon Jacobson, of course, junior champion and a strong GM in his own right. Brandon did fantastic for us in the match, scoring 2.5 out of 4, only losing to Carlsen. So that was a very important. He was a very important teammate for us in this particular match. So similar to what a Wonder did against Razvan, a very reserved setup here. And here Jennifer makes a mistake, at least what looks to me like a mistake, with the move knight to f6. Typically, in these openings, if white uses a flank pawn to attack the center, you really need to either take it or protect the pawn with another pawn. If I had played the move g6, I would definitely have played the move c6 to reinforce this pawn. If you take, I would take back. Jennifer played knight f6, and Brandon quickly captured and began to take over the center. This is like a Grunfeld defense, where black has given away the center. The only problem is black cannot trade off the knight. So we're going to quickly see here that after a few developing moves, Brandon presses through the center with his pawns, and black's pieces are extremely limited. Black does not have a lot of space due to a faulty opening. So, and very quickly, Brandon takes advantage of that. So Jennifer's trying to fight back for some space, but you can see that white has all the center. Knight c4, queen e2, knight d6, and basically this is like already a lost position for black, even though black isn't down any material, because black can't move their pieces. So she's played the opening quite poorly. White has the center, and Jacobson has a fantastic position here. So bishop to g5, putting pressure on the e-pawn, connecting the rooks. And yeah, like just a big position here for Brandon. So he brings the rooks to the center, retreats his knight back. There was no point in trading because that would only allow black to have some control of the center. So he retreated, h6, knight to d5, a little in-between move, attacking the queen and pressuring the pawn. Jennifer goes back, bishop to h4, and here Jennifer had one opportunity to play a tactical move and to get back into the game. Here, can anyone see a move for black that would actually have taken advantage of maybe this bishop h4 move? So it is a tactical move, so I want you to think outside of the box. And it was Jennifer's only chance in this game to fight for equality. Yeah, so the move here is actually, so g5 was played in the game. The move here is actually knight f5. And that's a very sneaky move. It attacks the bishop on h4, but it takes into account that the knight on d5 is not protected if e takes f5. And after queen takes d5, this isn't great, but it's better than the position as it was. White's center has been completely ripped up. Okay, but this was better than what happened. g5 was played in the game, bishop to g3, and e6. Jacobson pushes back, rook to e8, and then here the game is pretty much over after d5, which is what Jacobson played. I think Jennifer was relying on some tactics here. So first of all, if you take this pawn, the issue is that the rook can take. And so even though she placed her rook on e8 against the white queen, the problem is that this knight is simply hanging. And white is going to play rook a to d1 and attack the knight, and there's nothing you can do about it. So Jennifer played knight to b4. Brandon took on e6, opening up the rook to the knight on d6. Jennifer has to take with a rook to guard the knight, and then simply e5 with the pawn attacking the knight on d6. And there's nothing you can do about it. Rook takes d6 is coming, so bishop f8 was played. So if you play rook takes d6, obviously bishop takes, and there's still some pin action going on here. But Brandon here played a very simple and strong move with queen to d2. It's still a pin, the knight is lost, so Jennifer resigned in this position. This happened pretty quickly because this was like a 23-move game. So Grant and I are texting each other, and we're like, okay, win there, it's let's see what's going on the other boards. Keep in mind that coming into this round, we're down 5-3. So we need to make up some ground. Okay, this was one game, but here's the issue. Carlsen's still playing, right? Tari is still playing, and Irina is still playing. The good news is, by the time this game finished, A Wonder had won a rook against Aryan Tari, like due to a brain lapse by Aryan. Like he just played some move and lost his rook to a simple fork. So that was a relief. Aryan was pressing A Wonder in that game, so we were like, woo, thank you. We were off the hook in that game. Irina had a combative game with Razvan, which ended in a draw, and then Carlsen was squeezing Naroditsky, and Naroditsky ended up losing that game. So we won 2 games, lost a game, and drew a game. So we got a point back in this round. So now we're going into the final round. We're down 1 point. So we just need to do pretty well in the last round. And what the beauty of this league is that in the final round, board 1 plays board 1, board 2 plays board 2, and so on. So we just needed our players to step up. Outside of Carlsen on board 1, we liked Naroditsky versus Tari, we liked Jacobson versus Priotu, and we liked Irina Krush versus Jennifer Yu. So we liked our battles. We knew that any player against Carlsen would be a challenge, but we liked the rest of our boards. We're going into the last round, and we're down a point, but we like our head-to-heads, okay? So let's jump into that. So this game was beautiful. This was Jacobson on board 3 playing Razvan Priotu. This one was a miniature. So, when Grant and I are like cursing at each other and texting each other and, we're like having highs and lows, okay? We're like, oh my God, what's going on? Oh my God, right? So all this riffraff is happening, and then Jacobson wins in like 20 moves with black. And we're like, oh my God, the match is tied. This was a great game by Brandon. He really just understood the opening a lot better. So it was a classical Sicilian Richter Rauser variation with bishop to g5, the main line. And Razvan chooses the setup with the pawn on f3. It's most aggressive to play the move pawn f4, but pawn f3 is fine too. Jacobson trades, puts the bishop on c6, and he seemed to know this. He seemed to know this position pretty well, did Brandon. King b1, pawn h6, bishop drops back to c1, queen c7, very Sicilian-like moves. Black is not committing to castling too soon. After playing the move h6, white has a very easy plan of attack on the king side. So bishop c4, bishop e7, bishop to b3, and again, Brandon is not castling too soon on the king side, so he starts to play on the queen side with b5. g5 happened, a5, and already Brandon has taken over the initiative because he's threatening to trap the bishop. it makes you wonder why Razvan put the bishop on this diagonal, because this is what happens when your bishop is on b3 in the castle's queenside position. Black is able to advance the pawns and create further threats against the pieces. So he plays a4. Brandon pushes past, and then he plays knight to b5. To me, this is a really odd move because you allow Black's pawns to march down the board. Because exactly what happened. Knight b5 takes, and a4. To me, it made more sense to play knight to e2 and then remove the queen, try to remove the queen from the d4 square and, potentially put the knight there, which is a kind of a classic idea in this line. But here, he played knight to b5. And after trades in a4, Brandon's initiative is he's basically already breaking through on the king's on White's king. So bishop to a2, b3 was a nasty move. Pawn takes, bishop takes, and then he castled. Now, Brandon castled, and he knows that he's castling into a pawn attack, but he wants to connect his rooks. He's already pried open White's king. So the fact that White has the potential for a pawn storm on the king side doesn't really mean much. It meant more for Brandon to get his king's rook into the game. So that's what happened. Razvan tried to attack, but it's too little too late at this point. Queen to a5, and you can see that there's just nasty threats happening. Rook c1, queen takes b5, the bishop on b3 is hanging, the bishop on g5 is hanging. Rook g1, queen takes b3, bishop takes f6, and bishop takes f6. And the game is over. Razvan resigned because if queen takes f6, which seems like the logical move, queen d3 check, the king has to step over, and then rook a1 is made. Yeah. So this was a brutal game by Brandon, and really White never was in this game. It was kind of crazy that it was so easy. I think there was some odd moves here. Like, to me, bishop c4 in this line doesn't seem consistent with the opening. Because you're kind of like, you're playing it like a Velimirovich attack or a Sozin attack, but you've wasted a lot of time. So it's not the same. Bishop c4, it didn't really add up. And it kind of walks into this whole initiative that Brandon started over here. I think the last straw was right here, where Razvan played knight b5 and just allowed these pawns to come rolling down. Once that happened, it was like all Brandon here. So this happened very quickly. Like within, 5 to 8 minutes, this game was over. That makes the match even. So Carlsen is playing a wonder on board 1. Naroditsky is playing Tari. And Irina is playing Jennifer on board 4. So let's take a look at a wonders game with Carlsen. So needless to say, when we went into this round, of all the games we needed to win, we thought it was least likely that we would win on board 1, against Carlsen. So we thought, that's not a knock on a wonder. It's just that it's due respect to the world champion. Now, we knew that our players were capable of drawing games. Beating the world champion, we knew was going to be a very difficult task. The positive news was that Irina had a great position as Black against Jennifer Yu in a Carlsbad-like pawn structure where Jennifer's bishop was still on the inside of the pawn chains, like a poor man's Rubinstein King's Nimzo Indian. So that game was looking great for Irina. That game ended up in a draw because both players were in gross mutual time trouble, like 6-7 seconds apiece. And even though Irina is winning in the final position, it was understandable that she took the draw given the time constraints. It certainly would have been better than her flagging or losing on the clock. And some of our players may not have as much experience playing online rapid games and fast games. So they may not be as comfortable, moving the mouse around and things. Just it's a little bit different. So I was okay with that because of the time constraints. So somewhere along the line in this game, Grant texts me with excitement saying, look at the A Wonder game, right? And I was not really looking at the A Wonder game more than I was looking at the other games. And I was shocked whenever I came to the game. So I'll tell you about what moment it is. So the game started as a French defense. I play the French defense. I don't know if I should admit that. It's nice to see the world champion play it, but I'm surprised that, he doesn't know the truth. Maybe I should call him up and say, hey, Magnus, you know what the truth is about the French defense, right? Like, it's not a great defense. But, okay, he's been dabbling with it, and he plays the classical knight f6. A Wonder plays bishop to g5, which is the line I think is most exciting for white. Pawn takes, the burn variation, and knight to d7. So this quickly becomes essentially a Rubinstein variation of the French defense. And all of these moves are very normal. So not much is happening here. White has better piece activity, but black has not too many problems, but it has to be careful. So, okay, each side gets castled. I should point out that, that did not win a pawn on the previous move, because after castle, bishop takes. If queen takes, there's the classic bishop to b5 and discovered attack. So we got this position, and A Wonder was playing very sensibly. So his moves are coming with tempo, and he's, making very logical moves. Both sides are making smart moves. He has the threat here, of course, of bishop captures bishop, queen takes, bishop check, winning the queen. So Carlsen trades, and then here Carlsen plays e5, and there's nothing really wrong with that. So at this point, it's a pretty even game. I probably tuned into it right around here. I said, oh, Rubinstein French, maybe A Wonder draws the game or something. Who knows? Like I wasn't looking too deeply at it. At some point after these logical developing moves, so both rooks come to the middle, A Wonder's rerouting his knight to a more purposeful place. Right around here, and right around here, Carlsen got a little tempted and grabbed this pawn on a2. Bishop captures a2. And this is when Grant sent me, OF, look at A Wonder's board. And I got, I'm like, I'm scrambling to pull up the game. And A Wonder quickly played this move, pawn to b3. And yeah, as Chess Lover says, it's like Fischer-Spassky, kind of, but it's not an endgame. It's like Fischer-Spassky in the sense that black's bishop is going to be tied up into a pin here. This is like the Fischer game, but it has a little bit more detailed, a little bit more detail in the tactic. So if the queen takes, the bishop on a2 is being attacked, and it doesn't have an escape square. So here white plays rook a1 and the bishop is trapped. Okay. And yeah. So if bishop takes, which is what Carlsen played, the issue is that after rook to b1, the pin against the bishop on b3 is brutal. Normally in these types of positions, your queen can move along the diagonal and defend the bishop on the diagonal, and you're good. You get out of the pin and you guard your bishop. The problem with queen to e6, which would do exactly that, is knight to c5, forking the pieces. And, yeah. So Magnus is in a little bit of trouble here. So a5 and knight captures, and here Carlsen has to take with the pawn to avoid losing his bishop on b3. Carlsen has to take back with the pawn, and needless to say that fractures his king, and so a wonder brings the queen up and is now threatening to infiltrate. This whole thing is actually, there's a key detail here which happened in the game, which is just brutal. Here, Carlsen played rook c8, which is a blunder. And after check, this is the key move here. But this allows the tactic rook takes e5, which is what he missed. And there's a pin on the f-pawn, and this essentially wins the queen. Okay, or at least wins the king. So king to d7, bishop to b5 check, king c7, rook takes, queen takes. Okay, now, I was really surprised here. So obviously this is the key moment right here. White is up material. Black's king is very weak. All right? And on the commentary, I was watching Hess and Canty. So it was Hess and Jim, and Hess had suggested a line which is what a wonder played, which is takes, check, and trade down like this. And instinctively, I remember in my head, I was like, that's a weird line to play, because in this position, to me, if I was playing Carlsen or anyone and I was trying to win this game, I would be peeing my pants for one reason only. And what's that? Like, what would I be the most afraid of in this position, especially if I was playing somebody strong, but just in general, if I was playing a peer, I would be the most concerned about Black's counterplay involving the A-pawn, right? So the way I see this position, and when I was, I think that you should avoid the endgame. You should avoid any endgame where you have to deal with the A-pawn. So those of you who were following my streams back in the day, one of the rules I think is the dumbest rule in chess that has been created over time is trade when you're ahead. I think it's the dumbest rule ever. And at the Charlotte Chess Center, like when the kids are learning, it's like, we don't talk about that. Okay, it's not, trading when you're ahead is a ridiculous rule. The only time you should trade in a chess game, really, is when you are being attacked and you just need to trade off the attackers, your opponent's attackers. When you're the one attacking, you shouldn't trade. I don't care if you're up material or not. You shouldn't trade. I mean, unless you're up a queen or something, like, it's okay. But these are high-level games. No one's up a queen. And you got to follow kind of a little bit of a principle of the matter. So Black's king is wide open, and Black's a-pawn is the biggest source of counterplay. So if you go into the endgame that occurred, now you have to deal with this a-pawn with your rook, which doesn't make sense to me. So here, like, I would probably just keep the queens on the board. Queen f4, and no matter what, you're not going to lose this position, because you'll always be, like, Black has to put the king in the center, and you're not going to lose this position. I wouldn't trade the rooks either. I'd play here, and I would go after the Black king. I know that with the pieces on the board, only Black's king is going to be a problem. Okay, so I'm not worried about anything down the H file or whatever. That's all. That's nothing. The only thing that I'm scared about is this pawn. But my goal is to distract the black king so much, because black is dodging bullets, that doesn't have time to stroll the A pawn down the board. So I think it was a big mistake, number one, for a wonder to go into this liquidation tactic. So he played check, and it's a fancy way to trade. And according to the engine, this is still winning, but I want you to, Carlsen has 25 seconds on the clock, but at this point, he's only got one chance, and the only chance that Carlsen has is to use his A pawn as a distraction. So in a way, a wonder made it easier for Carlsen to play. If the pieces would have stayed on the board, not only was that fundamentally and on principle the better way to play because black's king was weak, but also Carlsen's decisions would have been much harder with limited time, because he would have had to, there would have been tactics everywhere against his king. Now he doesn't have to worry about getting checkmated. And he has one idea, which is to promote his A pawn. So even with 26 seconds and increment, he can figure that out. So that's what happened. So he starts to stroll this A pawn down the board. A wonder gets behind the pawn, which seems logical, and Carlsen guards it. And then it's like, okay, how am I supposed to win this? Because black is going to play king to b6 to try to flush the rook out and then bring the king up. This is very dangerous. White, this one little pawn, is stopping white's crippled pawn mass here for really getting down there fast enough. So I think this whole thing was kind of a mistake and lapse of judgment for a wonder who had time on the clock and is a 2600 player. I think he just, people ask me if chess is a sport, and I'm a little on edge about it because I think that sports, should be a little bit more physical. The definition, the traditional definition of a sport is physical. However, in competition, when anxiety gets to you, when you're trying to make these decisions and the time is starting to count down, you're playing the world champion, I think that's the part, if chess is a sport, and that's debatable, if it is truly a sport, that's the part that really makes it. Because here, a wonder was probably thinking, like, I'm winning this game, let's liquidate, and he made a bad decision in the moment. He definitely regrets the decision. He doesn't need to take it from me. He probably recognized it right after. So he's trying to get his own pass pawn going, and Carlsen is just going for counterplay. And so all this is happening, right? Like, this is all normal. Black has these pawns on the queen side. White has one on the king side. Okay, according to the computer, this is still winning, but clearly it's not easy because of what happened in the game. King b6, rook a8, king b7, rook to e8, a3, g6, and now the game is already equal, even though those are the most logical moves ever. Okay, a2, the pawn gets to the 7th rank, and now black's plan is quite easy. This pawn has to be stopped by the rook, and black is going to bring the king in, and this bishop stops the pawn from promoting. So the rook has to come back, and now Carlsen's king is coming in. So this is already objectively equal. And now they both have 8 seconds on the clock, 6 seconds on the clock, and it's a total mess. And Carlsen actually is winning after the move king to g4. Here, evidently, a wonder had to play rook to d1, cutting the king off from coming in. White is just passive. White is just defending. There's nothing that white can do. White can never bring the rook down here to get rid of the bishop because this pawn is going to promote. So, but after king to g4, it's actually Carlsen that's winning the game, because even though white is going to win the bishop, black is going to promote. So for example, like if you go here, if you try to bring your your king forward to dislodge the bishop, it's way too late because these pawns are connected. So this was a heartbreaking loss for a Wonder who was crushing the world champion with tactics. And then even though, let me just take it back to this one position, even though technically white is still winning after this queen, after going into this endgame, fundamentally I think the lesson to be learned, not for a Wonder, obviously, he's a 2600 Grandmaster, I'm sure he couldn't sleep after this on Tuesday. So not for him, but just for the audience, is don't trade when you're up. Don't go out of your way to trade just because you're up material. And even more importantly than that is when you have the attack, when you've got the attack on your opponent's kings, don't trade your pieces off. I don't care if you're up material or not. If you have more material, then go kill them. And that's the lesson that you should learn from this. And I've, in my very brief chess life where I was playing tournaments, I made many mistakes like that where you're up material, particularly at the club level, and you think, oh yeah, I'm just going to go around here trading everything off, and to the detriment of your position, because you're not like paying attention to what's happening on the board. You're just blindly moving your pieces around, trying to trade them off. And chess needs to be really considered. Chess really needs to be considered as a whole, and you can't really play on rules. But if there is a rule that I'm going to teach you, or that I want you to take away from this, it's when you're on the offensive and your opponent's king is very weak, you should not trade your pieces off. I don't care if you're up material or not. That's how you let people off the hook. And this was a high-level example of that because it featured the world champion and a 2600 rated GM. So yeah, I think a Wonder made the decision solely based on who he was playing, and he thought it would make his task easy, and he thought he would be able to play the position with no risk. But from a practical standpoint, I want you to pay attention to the clock times here. A Wonder has 4 minutes and Carlsen has 30. If you force Carlsen into this endgame, he's going to find pushing the A pawn down the board. If you play Queen F4, check, and you keep the major pieces on the board and you attack his king, he's got 30 seconds to navigate this minefield. Forget about it. It's over, basically. I mean, I don't care. For a 2600 player, I think if you give Naroditsky this position, even in a bullet game, he would also just go for the king. A Wonder is an amazingly talented player, and I think he was just, again, he just had a brain lapse, probably due to the pressure of playing Carlsen and knowing that you're winning. It's the only thing that could really explain it because he had time on the clock. Irina had a winning position on her board versus Jennifer, but she took a draw, and Daniel drew with Tari. So this loss cost us the match, and I hate to say it that way because it really is a team thing. Heartbreaking for a Wonder. He lost 2 winning positions just due to performance anxiety or like whatever you want to call it. But we still love a Wonder, and really he was the MVP of the, when it comes to the game quality, he was. It just, again, in the end, just let it slip in 2 games. But he could have easily gone 4-0, beating even the world champion. But okay, that's behind us. So we lost 7.5 to 8.5 to a team that no one thought we had a chance against.